Good evening, and welcome to Heal Conversations. And this is one of those episodes that bring excitement. And obviously, I do understand for those of you that were looking forward to this specific episode. And like I had promised, I'll be hosting Jito Kayumba, the professor. Yeah, and obviously, he will be speaking to us about economic inequality and what that means to him and what we the people with 1,000 kwachas can do. And so Jito, you can say hello to our viewers, and you can go ahead and to your presentation from there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pilato. I really appreciate the invitation. And thank you for all of you who's tuned in, regardless of which platform. I'm told this is on multiple platforms. Thank you for taking time to listen to this. I think this is an extremely important topic. And I think inequality can be looked at from various angles, but the issue of income inequality is actually a very, very important element. And not just income inequality, but economic inequality. And I'll sort of give you an overview of this, and then let's have a fruitful conversation, so that by the time we're done, people can walk away with something that could inspire them to make decisions in their daily lives that improves their standing within the economic landscape. So let me take it right away.
Yeah, we can get into your presentation now. We're ready.
Great. Alrighty. So as it shows here, income inequality. One thing I wanted to just touch on quickly is, why does this matter to me? Why is this something that I even, became interested in? Why did I become a venture capitalist and really have a worldview that has a lot of appreciation for economics? And it all starts with the time when I was a student. When I was studying, when I had the privilege to go study in Canada, I saw the way the world looked at Africa. I saw the difference between the wealth of the Western world and the poverty of our continent. And I realized that, first of all, it was extremely demeaning to my dignity to know that, where I come from is significantly different in terms of wealth, in terms of capacity, in terms of adding value to the world. And I felt as though that even also had an impact in the way that people of African descent, Black people, are treated in the Western world. Because when you come from a continent where you essentially represent a fraction of global GDP, and I also got a very strong sense that the way that we are judged as human beings is really, first and foremost on our economic standing. So for us to be taken seriously as a people, for us to be recognized in the global scene, of course, our leaders, this is something I've talked about even during my TEDx talk, where, we talk about our leaders wanting to sit on the UN Security Council, but we're not really contributing in a significant way to the global economy, then it's not easy to be taken seriously. And even today, we're talking about Black Lives Matter. There's a global movement to address issues of racism and so on. But the fact of the matter is, for as long as a certain fraction, a certain cleavage, group of people are in an economically underprivileged standing, then there'll be other implications. So economic inequality has massive implications. Talk about COVID, right? Coronavirus. People are talking about African Americans accounting for the highest, having the highest mortality rates in the US. That's also got an association with income inequality because of the inability to access healthcare. Of course, there's various dimensions, but I want to move into this image. I don't know if you could see it.
Yeah, we can.
Let me see the next page. Okay, great. So this image is powerful. It's one that essentially, okay, sorry, it's just that when I'm looking at the screen, I don't see that particular image. You see an image of a city, like an overview of a city, right?
Nope, we can only see the slide saying economic inequality.
Oh, okay, you know what? I'm going to have to change the slide arrangement. Just give me just a moment. Sorry, let me just reshare. Sorry, it will just take a sec. Okay, I just realized I made a little mistake. It won't take too long. I think this is the one I'll go for. This is the one I'll share. All right, I'm going to make it full screen. Okay. Now do you see the image of the city with the two neighborhoods, right?
Yes, yes, we
Now,
do.
this image, fantastic.
Mhm.
This image is from South Africa. You know, South Africa is known as the most unequal society in the world, where one element of their society are extremely impoverished, while another is extremely wealthy. And this image is it always just it slaps me in the face of the failure of we as a people. I mean, even though this is talking about South Africa, but this element is quite common across most African economies. But there is a context to this, and there's a context to economic inequality. But I thought, let me just put this across so that there's an appreciation for really how stark inequality can be and how big the disparity can be. And I'll begin with a bit of context. Now, we need to understand GDP. I'm somebody who's probably obsessed with GDP. I track it across the world. I like to see how are different economies faring in their GDP growth, or what makes up their GDP. Because at the end of the day, what this essentially means is this is how most nations are measured in terms of their wealth, right? It's the gross domestic product. It's how productive an economy is. It's how much wealth is it generating, and to a large extent, it gives you a sense of how well the economy is doing. And the way in the simplest way to articulate it, it's the sum total of the market value of all the products and services in an economy in a given year. So that's how you can understand the value of the economy. Now it's broken down into four components: C, I, G, and then NX. So C is consumer spending. Now consumer, sorry, I think I just lost Zesco, but it's okay. It's going to come back shortly. Uh, so C stands for consumer spending. This is the money that you and I spend in ShopRite, when we load up our phone at Top Time, whatever money we spend from our income. That's added up into GDP from the products that we buy. The other is investment. This is basically a combination of what the government saves from what after they've collected their revenues from from the people, from taxes, and what's left over after they spent the money. So whatever they save, and then also part of it is household savings, the money that you and I keep in the bank that we save, and then also capital equipment that's procured by companies to build factories, to maybe even tractors that engage in production of wheat and so on and so forth. And then government spending. This is essentially what government spends on anything from roads to procurement of all sorts of supplies. And then last but not least is net exports. This is really the difference between what is exported and what is imported. Now, all these matter because there's a role that all of us play in an economy within this equation. We are consumers, we're investors, we're shareholders, we're government employees, we're suppliers, we're exporters, we're importers, and and that now gives you a sense of who is now consuming what. Now the way now that this sort of stage has been set in terms of appreciating what GDP is, because I needed to make this clear so that because it's something I'll come back to quite a bit. I need to just give you a short story of how an economy is structured and how you know there are massive beneficiaries and those who are left out of the equation, or at least only getting the minor crumbs. I hope you're still with me in terms of sound and everything, and the
Yeah,
transaction
we
slides are
good.
clear.
Very clear.
Fantastic. Okay, so everything is a transaction. Absolutely everything. From the moment you wake up in the morning to the moment you go to sleep. And in this whole process, there's always a beneficiary, whether we like it or not. Somebody is going to benefit off your activities. So I'll give you an example. A young boy called John wakes up in the morning, brushes his teeth, obviously turns on the light, opens up his phone, checks social media, has breakfast, gets in a vehicle, or jumps on a bus. The bus takes him wherever he needs to go, maybe work. There's various activities. You might stop by the store, pick up a few things, and all the activities that anyone is going to get involved in. Up until the time he goes home, maybe turns on the TV, could have a decoder, could have whatever the case, but is consuming a particular product of entertainment or whatever the case, and then obviously goes to bed. Now, at, from with these transactions, there was obviously an exchange of money, right? So when I mention all the various activities from getting up and so on, you're living in a house, brick and mortar, Cement obviously came from Lafarge. Then you kind of have to appreciate, now who is behind all these various entities. When the person brushed their teeth, how was that product imported into the country? Who are the beneficiaries in the supply chain? Who's the owner? Who's the manufacturer? Is it Colgate Palmolive? Who are the shareholders of Colgate Palmolive? When John had breakfast, the eggs came from the supermarket, from ShopRite, let's say, for example, and all the various components that came into it, the bread, the wheat that goes into the bread, the transportation that brought the wheat into the whole value chain and that created the bread. And you name it, from the tea to the mobile network that he used when turning on his phone to utilize social media, the fuel that was used to ferry him, whether in his vehicle or in a bus. Um, and you can name it. You can visualize it from there. Every other activity was a transaction. Somebody made money. Now, again, some when somebody's making money, it means that someone else is losing money. And then in another instance, you have to figure out who is making that money and who are the biggest consumers. When you think back on the GDP structure, the way the economy is structured, you realize that we as Zambians are stronger when it comes to the consumption side of things, because very few of us are shareholders in the businesses that create value, that essentially are on the receiving end of our money. And this does translate into a significant amount of inequality and access to certain resources, and also has an overarching effect on, of course, our GDP and even our standing in the world, because we're not creating direct value for this local economy. We're not the ones who are, sort of charged with, whether it be, owning the banks or owning all the infrastructure, or all you can name it. I mean, I don't have to be particularly specific. You can think of every single thing. And in fact, this is a challenge to everybody who's listening to this call or into this webinar, is to think of all the activities that they engage with on a monthly basis. In fact, even better, uh, you get a pen and paper, write your salary, and then begin to minus everything where your salary goes, each and every item, from rent to food to whatever other bills, phone bill, you name it, DSTV, fuel, and then ask yourself who received that money after you spent it. That's how you know how the economy is controlled, and you figure out who the shareholders are and so on. And there's a significant power in being part of the production process, because ultimately they're the ones who essentially receive the capital. And that, of course, at the end of the day, government would benefit from revenues, and that should ultimately translate into the value for us as citizens. Now, moving a bit forward, I need to share a little bit of a story regarding the historical and cultural context of Zambia, and perhaps an answer as to why we're not particularly strong participants in the production process within our economy, why we're not the ones who own the factories, why we're not the ones who own the banks, all the telcos, all the whatever, the modes of production, or the sources of what's produced for us to consume, whether it be retail and so on and so forth. So first of all, not too long ago, I mean, within our lifetime, and it's still prevalent today, we were living in a village, right? We had a village setting. It's a beautiful culture with our traditional leaders and so on, and we shared everything, right? We were an egalitarian society, so we wouldn't say as much of an unequal environment, but everybody had access to the same resources. Obviously, things changed because of colonialism. There was an institution that was set up for the benefit of the colonial power to ensure that there was extraction of minerals and value that enables the Western world obviously to be enriched. It was a completely commercial enterprise. Now, obviously, within that environment, our people who were essentially living a very simple, sort of agrarian or very simplistic lifestyle within the village setting, were brought in as laborers and service providers to provide services to the colonial sort of forces. And then moving into the post-independence era, after, of course, time flew, because we had certain limitations in the amount of education we had, the amount of resources we had, because of the mindset that we work for a colonial sort of system that's meant to sustain it, that there wasn't sufficient access to information and knowledge on entrepreneurship, on owning the modes of production and so on, that it was a time to really find a way to sort of figure things out from a government standpoint. And of course, we went into a more Eastern, call it communist sort of style of governance. And then after that, of course, everybody remembers 91 when there was a liberalization. There was a revolution towards multi-party democracy, but I'll focus more on the economic side. It liberalized the economy that allowed for companies to essentially be privately owned, and of course, that obviously, now because we weren't sufficiently knowledgeable of how to run these businesses, most of them actually ended up in foreign hands. So now the question is, how do we become greater participants so that we're alleviating the challenge of not being strong participants within the Zambian economic landscape? Because at the end of the day, in fact, one sad reality, one sad fact that I've put across before, and it's not something to be angry about. It's something to just appreciate, is the fact that we, in the formal economy, if you exclude the state-owned entities, when you exclude ZESCO and all these large state-owned entities, the private sector, the formal private sector, is largely about over 90%, over 95% owned by foreigners, which is a challenge for us to look at ways in which we could become stronger participants, so that there's more resources around to reduce inequality. Because obviously the reason for this conversation is all about inequality and that of having access to resources. Now we need to look to define our role in the economy. We need to think more about solving problems. We need to create value, develop competencies, and scale. Whether it be figuring out ways in which we can substitute those items that we import into the country, manufacturing them locally, leveraging on local endowments, drawing on local capital, building up the competencies and the expertise to build up these factories and these production lines, so that we're creating this value not only for our consumption, but for that of the region. And this is something that we need to get more aggressive on. Of course, we can go deeper into the conversation, I think, after this presentation, because I know I'm within a 20-minute time frame. But now there are various participants in this equation of how we can essentially become effective in being stronger economic participants as Zambians. Because one thing I'll tell you is beautiful about the Zambian culture and most African cultures is that we take care of each other. When somebody is affluent, you know that that person would be able to support, let's say, a relative in the village, or there are multiple beneficiaries, because we're not entirely how do I say, like having nuclear family structures. We grew up with multiple relatives, and there's this mindset of Ubuntu, which is I am because you are. With your well-being, if it's not in the right sort of frame, then it's going to affect me. And I think that's a very important element of our culture. So government plays a very big role, very important role. And I think what we need to do as we shift into a paradigm towards greater economic equality, where there's more resources available to move around, particularly within the private space, is the involvement of government as a partner, really, to develop sectors that are weak, for example, so that there's diversification away from the usual traditional sectors like mining, where, of course, most of the economic value comes from in a country, where we look at not just the likes of agriculture, which is also another great sector, but perhaps leveraging on other endowments that are associated with our local economy, whether it be filling the energy gap, being a net exporter of energy, developing local privately owned energy, leveraging on the water resources that we have for hydro, solar, you name it, for exports. Of course, building support infrastructure. Of course, there's been road programs, which is great for access to markets, but there has to be greater participation in ensuring that there's consolidation of infrastructure development. So I'll give you an example of tourism. Zambia is a beautiful place. It's somewhat isolated. Getting there is not very easy. You drive, the road is not bad. You drive maybe 9 hours to get there. But in order for that place to flourish, there has to be a coordination of efforts. So not only should hotel developers, but also perhaps government be setting up an airport so that the airlines are going there. There's incentives for airlines to go there by perhaps taking out, landing fees or airport taxes. And also making sure that perhaps in addition to airports and and hotels, but there's also other events. So let's say partnering with other corporates to make sure that this end consolidation talking about is enabling one to have multiple options. So let's say whether it be the other matters of need for the area, food and other amenities, so that it becomes a consolidated sort of environment. And of course, it takes government to do that to support you with infrastructure. Fiscal incentives are very important because when you're looking to, if you're a Zambian and you want to, let's say, build a power plant, you want to build a cement plant, you need to have some sort of favoritism because we don't have a lot of capacity financially. But if you're provided with various incentives, whether it be a waiver on tax in a certain period or access to a certain resource that is exclusive to Zambia. Sorry, let me I think the light came back on. Oh, here we go. Don't know if people could see me. Yeah. So yeah, excellent. Yeah, it's just, it had was some power there. So yeah, access to fiscal incentives, market facilitation. So for example, the great thing about government also is the capacity to engage in multiple bilateral relationships, utilizing its diplomatic relationships to engage with other countries, Zimbabwe, Angola, and so on, so that there's access to the trade linkages or facilitating, let's say a consolidation of. And I'm trying to give you an example. So let's say we know for a fact that there's a massive deficit of beans in Congo, and we know that they consume a lot of it, and we have a lot of it here, and it would take a government involvement to be able to do that, and for that linkage to be done with Zambians, so they know what to get into. Because I get asked a lot, look, I want to be an entrepreneur. What business do I get into? And when you have access to a market, it's easier for you to now define how you're going to do it. And then of course stimulus. Stimulus, as far as I'm concerned, is really just capital, and being provided with capital from various
Hello? So I think we lost you, Jito, there. You probably might need to check your internet. And so what you're watching is we're listening to Jito, and Jito is making his presentation of what inequality looks like from his perspective. And then obviously what he's been talking about is about investment and value addition to what we already have as a country. And when Jito comes back, obviously we'll get into question and answers. Right now, we're just listening to him making his submissions. And as he comes back, we'll be getting into details of where you be asking him, trying to understand some of these concepts that he's talking about, GDP, Shan, all those nice things that he was mentioning. So we'll be able to,
yeah.
Yes. So Jito is back. I was trying to make use of the time that you were in town, and obviously you can pick it up from where you ended. And obviously you've gone past 20 minutes, so you might need one to
Okay, I'm gonna wrap it up shortly. Yeah, it's 3 minutes past, but I'll just give another 2 minutes. Let's talk about stimulus. Stimulus is where you are provided with capital from the likes of pension funds or other resources where the capital is cheaper or it's easier to access for a strategic project. For the sake of export or anything that could be of a great strategic nature or that would enable inclusive economic growth. Because this is why we need to embrace this new paradigm, because we want to have inclusive economic growth, one that enables not only Zambians, indigenous Zambians, to be owners of of the economy, so that we can have access to the resources for us to be alleviated from issues of poverty and the like, so that we can enable social impact, and that includes job creation. But obviously, that also has an impact on alleviating inequality and lifting people out of poverty, and having access to skills for people to better their lives, so that the standards of living are improved, and of course live in a better country. Because the reason we're talking about inequality obviously is because of the fact that there's always a person who gets the short end of the stick. And because one thing not to also remember is that inequality has beneficiaries as well. There are those who potentially would benefit from a skewed where some would be in risk while others aren't. So this is really just an overview from an economic perspective.
Mm. I think we've lost Jito again. I don't know what network he's using. Probably we might need to use the network I'm using. Yes, so again, so after this presentation, we will be asking him questions, and I'm sure he's going to bounce back. Jito bounce back. I know he's going to bounce back. And I'll be inviting everyone every one of you that are watching to ask him questions. And yep, so he's here.
Okay, I have no idea.
You keep running away. You keep running away, brother. What's up, brother?
So I can't hear you.
Okay, so you can continue. I can hear you. I can hear you and
Okay, it should be fine.
Yep,
Okay,
I can hear you.
sorry about that. At which point did it cut? Because I was just wrapping up the presentation.
I think you were talking about economic ownership, right? With
Yes.
Zambian
Okay,
getting
so
in the transactions and getting ownership of the economy.
Yes, and it's important because it comes with dignity. It's where if you can make decisions around how the economy functions, you're able to extract as much value as possible from the economy, and you're able to do more with more resources, local resources. I think the trouble is where we are right now as a country, and it's not just exclusive to Zambia. I think it's something that is quite common across the African continent. Is the fact that it was built on an environment that incentivized, or at least not only incentivized, but was skewed towards benefiting colonial forces. But of course, time has really come for our sort of economic liberation, so to speak. I think we've gone through various iterations of development, from coming into ensuring that our social, political sort of well-being, or at least control is established, but then coming to a point where we are now participants not only in the local economy, but how the local economy affects the global economy. Because at the end of the day, that's what's going to put food in the mouths of the children of this country, including ourselves. But that's what's going to build a stable society that's anchored on local manufacturing, that is anchored on local production capacity, that does create those sustainable jobs long term, and really alleviates inequality. So that's really, yeah, my views on that. But I'm curious to hear your comments or
Yes,
questions.
so you are now invited to ask Jito any question regarding what he said and what you think about economic inequality from from his presentation. So from this moment, I'll be taking questions. And then for those that are watching us for the first time, I would like to remind you that this program is a follow-up program on the album that I did called Here I Live, which discusses inequality from different sections of society. So this is a follow-up program. If you've not gotten the album yet, you can find it on www.iampilato.com, or you can search your Apple Store. Is it App Store or Play Store? If you're on Android, look for Pimu, Pimu, and you find the album there. So Jito, I'd like to understand from your perspective: is economic equality, economic justice possible in a capitalist state?
Yes, it is. I believe it is, and I think, and that's a very good question, because it's one that addresses something that I actually do for a living. So when you're a venture capitalist, I mean, my entire profession, my title in my work has the word capital in it. So I'm very biased towards capitalism, right? Because we raise money, and that money is placed in businesses that enables those businesses to be scaled, to grow, and then of course, we gain our value from shareholder value, from the increased value of the business, where we are able to draw on the profits of the business through its accumulation of profits, but then also where we're able to exit the business at some stage when it's at a higher value, where we can sell it and make a profit. When I say sell it on to a larger company that could scale it even further. But what now this is so that's the capital side of things. But capital, venture capital, private equity, if you will, which is interchangeable, um, is very concerned about what we call ESG. It's environmental, social, and governance. This is something that not many people get to know about investing and investments. That is not just profit driven. That there has to be a strong, how to call it, social and social element to it. And the E, of course, I'll start with breaking down ESG. So we are not allowed by our investors, the investors that we work with, and not even within our investment guidelines. We can't invest in a business that's going to do anything that's adverse to the environment. And this includes, and it not necessarily just having some sort of effluent or discharge into the environment that harms it, but we also want to make sure that it's not just doing harm or doing no harm, but actually doing good as having a net positive effect on the environment. That's extremely important. The second is social. We have a counter in our office. There's a message board that talks about how many jobs we've created. As of now, we've created over 1,000, no, 1,000, I think we're at 1,300 jobs that we've created as a venture capital firm through the investments that we've made. Now, that's very important in enabling for inclusive economic growth, because what that does is that whether you're setting up a dairy or you're doing a real estate project or you're doing a manufacturing, industrial manufacturing project, you're employing hundreds of people at a time. You're upskilling them. You're taking people out of poverty, essentially. I'll give an example. In Solwezi, where we have some investments, you've got individuals who used to cut trees and chop them up into, of course, make charcoal. That's what their profession was. And then we convert them into milkers or factory workers. And so the environment has been somewhat mitigated because they're no longer doing what they were doing. We've taken out of a negative sort of environmental activity into a activity where they have not only gainful employment, but they can utilize the skills that we're giving them to be able to get another job later on, because now the person is structured. They're in an environment where they understand systems and processes and the manufacturing line and even actually having something reasonable on one's CV. And of course, that person, as you know, in the village setting, and I see this very closely, you've got a guy with, he's got a wife, 4 children. They're now going to school. They've got school shoes and they get the school books. The nutrition level, because another problem we have in our society is lack of access to good nutrition. That has an effect on the cognitive capacity of a child, because when you're growing up, you need to have access to good nutrition. So of course they can afford that now. And then beyond that, the livelihood in the community goes up. People set up market stores because people have an income in the area. So now people can buy talk time, they can buy groceries. So the economy is created, is a microeconomy created. So these are lives being uplifted. So this is why I can tell you that venture capital or capitalism can be very positive, but it has to be regulated, because unchecked, it can do a lot of harm. You can do more harm than it does good, but it's necessary that not only are people gainfully employed, there's an employment act that really addresses that. And of course, through the Ministry of Labor, making sure that people are employed in a manner that does enable them to sustain a good livelihood. So really that's my view on why such an endeavor is good for the country.
Okay, so I'm going to follow that up. Let me just get 3 more questions from the viewers, then I'll get back. I'll follow that question up. So this one is coming from Sujo Michael Nkata. Sujo says, factors of production include land, labor, technology, and capital. Do you think the current empowerment programs has adequately addressed these factors in creating equality?
Yeah, so the current empowerment programs address primarily capital. Land, labor, not so much. And I think that's a very important question that Susie has posed, because what is really missing is technical capacity. I've been in situations where we've provided capital to somebody who had a great idea, great initiative, but did not have the capacity to execute. And it's not their problem. It's not their fault. They had the dream, they had the ambition, but they'd never been in an environment where they could do such a thing. So for example, you think of any random industry. So let's say the production of mill balls, right? So those are it's these metallic sort of balls which will go into a mill that during the crushing process of copper ore. Let's say Zambian says they want to get into that. It's well and good. The mines buy it all the time. In fact, if anything, they're importing a significant amount of it. There are some entities coming up. But in order to set that up, you need to understand the full supply chain. How much steel do we need on a regular basis? How much power? How much gas? There's so much involved in the production of renewables. If you've never done it before, then you're going to run into serious challenges. So what do you need? What's the bridge? What's the gap? It's technical capacity. It's being able to even understand how do you start at a certain level, then you're able to scale. How do you have sufficient capital to take you through a certain period where, because every business has what we call a burn rate, where it loses money, it's not yet generating cash flows that are positive, that sustains the business. So businesses need that opportunity to have its, especially in a strategic sector like mining and areas like that, especially when you're trying to develop the sector and local capacity. So really to wrap up the answer to the question that Susio has asked, we have to provide more technical capacity, more technical skills, create opportunity for more joint ventures. So people are working with people who understand best practices. So if you know that renewable factory, renewable production is best in Yugoslavia, then you send Zambians over there to figure it out how it works, then we can excel at it. The same way we in Zambia are great at certain things that we can also export in terms of skills and capacity. So the key really is skills.
So this one is coming from Dawana Youngson. Dawana Youngson is watching us on from our YouTube channel, and is asking, how does the tax regime impact on local investors differently from the way it treats foreign investors?
There's no difference. The tax rate is fixed. There's no this tax. The only thing that's different is that each sector has a different tax regime. So, for example, telecoms has a lot of tax. I mean, there's the tax that's paid, to ZICTA. There's actual excise duty. There's all these factors. So it's sector by sector. So the fact of the matter is the tax regime is not different from a foreign investor from a local investor. But essentially, to catalyze local investment, perhaps there should be an opportunity for Zambians to get into certain sectors with a certain amount. And I think I did allude to that in my slides, where we talk about having economic incentives, local economic incentives, so we catch up, because we don't really own anything. So anyway, so that's my answer to that question. It's actually pretty simple.
This one is coming from Mwansa Bernadette Mushinge. Mwansa is asking, minimum wages are very important for reducing inequality. They are quite low in Zambia. VCs don't like minimum wages. I don't know what VCs, voucher capitals, don't like minimum wages.
No, venture.
You don't like minimum wages.
No, we do. We're very particular about. You see, a business has to be sustainable. Let's think about it this way. In order for a business to run, so let's say you are you make milling meal, right? You buy maize, you process it. There's all sorts of elements in your supply chain. There's within the actual production process, you need power, you need expertise, there's logistics, blah blah blah. Brand. So now you have to look, and of course, labor is a cost. And the reality is, in business, your profits are obviously impacted by the difference between the cost and the revenue, right? So if you're able to cut down your cost, then obviously you're going to make a bigger profit. And this is why I said earlier that capitalism has to be regulated. Unchecked, it can be abusive. So Bernadette is right. I mean, not about the VCs, not like minimum wages, but she's right in the sense that minimum wage is important, and people have to have a livable wage. That it should be legislated that minimum, so that people can pay, can live, and that's absolutely right. So even when people are looking at developing businesses, they have to factor in that, can this business model sustain a labor force who can absorb a minimum wage of X? If the minimum wage is too high, it means that the business model is effective. So she's absolutely right on that. But I will challenge her by saying no, VCs are okay with minimum wages.
So this one is coming from Mwansa Bernadette Mushinge. Mwansa is asking, minimum wages are very important for reducing inequality. They are quite low in Zambia. VCs don't like minimum wages.
we care more than we look. We look evil, like all we care about is making money, but no, um, we certainly care with that. Of course, there's many entrepreneurs out there would prefer to pay someone very little so they can make more money. I mean, yeah.
So just as a follow-up, remember you had talked about jobs that were created in Solwezi.
Yes.
Whilst working on the album, I did a lot of touring and research work for it. And what I discovered was a lot of investors that go to Solwezi, a lot of investors that go and invest in these areas do take advantage of cheap labor that is easily accessed. And so from my research and interaction with these communities, you realize that if they get less educated workforce, if they get less exposed workforce, they would pay them little money for the work that if they got somebody educated, somebody exposed, they would pay more. To what extent do you think, what extent would you tell me or anybody that's watching us that the jobs that have been created in Solwezi do not fall in the quantity of people that were employed, but also quality of employment and how much money they're getting decent pay for the work that they're doing in those companies that have employed them. Jito, I think his network is just. I'm using Pilatoteo. Pilatoteo is super powerful, eh? So he's gonna come back. I think his network is not as good as mine, and I would recommend that he uses mine. He gets my network. Jito. So if you're joining us, just joined us now. Jito is speaking to us about economic inequality. Yes, Jito. You were about to respond.
I'm back.
I think you need to get.
Yeah, my apologies.
I'll need to plug you. I need to introduce you to my network, which doesn't die that easily. Did you hear me?
Okay. Yeah.
So you were responding to my question.
Yes, I heard that. I heard that.
On the cheap. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
So what?
Yeah.
I would like to hear your thoughts.
I hope I'm coming through clearly. I hope you can see me and you can hear me clearly.
I can hear you. Jito, I can hear you.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, I was worried that the network went off again. Yeah, this is embarrassing. No. But okay, excellent. So
and the network went. Jito, what network is that? Okay, you're not gonna tell me. No, man. But I want that question answered.
Oh goodness. Okay. Hi. Okay. Okay. So essentially, when an investor goes into any place, of course they've done their math, their unit. There are various elements that go into what makes an investment work, right? So they've done their net present value, they know the internal rate of return, the cost factor is built into that. So obviously labor is one of them. Now, we also have to remember one thing, and this goes back to education and our access to education. An investor needs people, right? So it depends. Some laborers or employees may not be skilled, but are still necessary for things that don't require much skill, especially the more manual labor, chopping down the trees to clear land and so on. And in most cases, those won't be permanent. And it's true. If there's an opportunity to exploit, a lot of investors will exploit. That's why regulation is important. Regulation by government to make sure that, and especially for those who are ignorant, because a guy in a village, in Mansa or in Solwezi or whatever, may not really will just be happy to get 100 kwacha, but they could have gotten 5,000. Who knows? Or had the person had been more knowledgeable and gotten a lot more. So that is a reality. So that's just to set that, to put that on the table. But the other thing is the lack of access to education, at least quality education, that many people in our rural communities have, is a huge limitation in itself. So, and we are frankly valued by the quality of education, especially when in a work environment. When if somebody has, let's say, they're in a village and they've only gone up to grade seven, then again, a lot of people's value is priced on that, and that in itself is a reflection of inequality. So, of course, that's as a country, we have a lot of work to do to give more people access to education that can enable them to have more value, to be paid better for the greater value that they bring into an organization. Um, Now, I don't know how else I could put this. So I think that's my feedback really. It's knowing that there are people by virtue of the unfortunate stroke of luck or circumstance that won't get certain opportunities by virtue of their lack of access to certain things. And for that reason, yes, exploitation is very much possible. But I think the only way to alleviate that is there being more conscious uh, of conscientiousness, I guess you could say, of investors to go into environments with a view to not exploit, and there be a greater sense of on this question that you've asked, which is very important, is that if Zambians, right, when we talk about investors, typically 9 times out of 10, we're talking about foreign investors. But if I'm talking about Pilato Holdings, right, Pilato Capital, Pilato Mining, you are not going to exploit the people because they're your people. And this is why we need more Zambian
I'll tell you,
owners.
the West employers are local employers. I've encountered a lot of local employers that mistreat their people so much, and you
Yeah,
just think if this was somebody from another country, you'd think because we
they're
are,
racist. Yeah,
but
yeah.
I feel when profit is prime, when profit is the main drive, human life
Mm,
is humanity is not given the much respect compared to profit. Okay, so there is this one. Uh,
mm.
eh,
Sure.
Lak Elias Chisha is asking, Jito, what do you think should be done to our so-called economists? Because I've been wondering if they are up to standard in my personal view. They are the ones who understand the world economy now. We have been complaining about dollars. Does it mean there are no economic indicators to say apanomba fiaruban?
I like
Do
Luck.
you want to respond
Luck
to
is my
that?
guy. Yeah, yeah.
Do you want
Okay.
to
So
respond to
Luck,
that?
yeah. I could address a little bit of that. You see, there's a reason in my initial sort of in my presentation, I gave you the context of the Zambian economy and the history. And frankly speaking, we can cut the slack to anyone who is charged at this point in time with managing our economic affairs because everything comes down with foundation. Let me give you an example. Two school children, one boy called Aditya, another guy called Jito, right? Jito is a Zambian. He goes to school with Aditya, who's an Indian. They're in the same class, they're learning the same things. But at lunchtime or when school's over, Jito goes home, plays with the friends, whatever, has his
Jito has disappeared again. This network needs a Pilato net plugin. I think I need to introduce Jito to my network. So we're gonna still wait for him, and don't worry, I'm gonna help him with Pilato net. Uh, I'm gonna I'm gonna help him with Jito. So meanwhile, you can still send in questions. It's gonna come back, and as it comes back, you respond to these specific questions. So you can send in your questions. I'm discussing. We're listening to Jito today, and he's sharing his perspective on inequality, especially economic inequality in Zambia, and how people, ordinary people like you and me, can what we ordinary people can do to fight inequality. So for those of you that do not understand what inequality is, this is an opportunity for you to ask questions and get involved. Get involved. Inequality threatens our humanity, our dignity. Inequality threatens national peace and unity, as I said. So you cannot have a society where a few people are in charge of everybody, of every institution, of everything in society. So you need to have a collective ownership, collective benefits. Jito is back.
Thank you. I am so. I.
I need to get you a better SIM card.
I think so. I've decided to get a third source of internet, so hopefully this will stick. But
Okay.
so I was talking about a story of two school-going children. They're both 10 years old. They go to the same school. One is Zambian, one is Indian. The Zambian goes home, hangs out with the family, does his homework like a good boy, and spends time with his grandmother and whatever, watches cartoons. Then the Indian boy, after work, after school, he'll go to his father's shop to work. The Zambian kid is thinking, man, that Indian kid's getting abused. He's going to work in the factory as a shopkeeper. The guy's only 12 years old, 10, 15. And we think something's wrong. But then guess what? By the time we're finishing school, going to university to do what this and that, Aditya already knows exactly what he's going to do. He's going to work in the family business. He's going to build up on the legacy of his father. He's going to take that business to another level because he's understood the intricacies of that business. He understands, it becomes cultural. Entrepreneurship, you also have to remember, the biggest companies in the world, you find actually owned by families. Some of the big banking groups, the big mining houses, you find that actually it was founded in 18X. For example, let me give you the guy who's the CEO of Ford Motor Company. His last name is Ford because his great grandfather started Ford in the 1800s. So what am I trying to say? We are new to this. Entrepreneurship is new to us. Managing our own somewhat economic affairs, we're playing catch up. We're coming from far behind. Our minds, the most valuable, not our minds, our resources, the copper and so on, are mostly run by foreign firms. And the fact of the matter is, of course, they've got the financial capacity, they've built up competencies over generations. Just like that, I use the story of the Indian boy and the Zambian boy as a microcosm, to the context of economic competence and development. That, when you compare, let's say, Zambians' participation in the global economy with, let's say, that of Germans and Indians and Chinese, is that they've been building those competencies over generations, whereas we're just figuring it out now. That has implications on the kwacha because, as you all know, right, anyone who understands currencies understands that it's controlled. It's a matter of supply and demand. It's a matter of balancing payments. Which is connected to exports. How much does a country earn in export revenue versus how much of its currency of forex has to use to procure imports, and that's essentially what impacts what the currency, how it operates. Now, if your economy is weak because your own people are not making stuff to export, then yes, those problems will be there. So it's not a problem. It's not an issue of blaming economists, right? Economists can interpret all this, like I'm interpreting it, but we can be part of the solution by becoming increasingly participants. That's why the introduction is really talking about participation, because that is what will alleviate our economic challenges.
So Jito, if you had 10 billion kwacha as stimulus package for Zambia, who would you give it to? Would you give it to the street vendors? Would you give it to people in Kaunda Square? Would you give it to the banks? Would you give it to the companies?
Man, that's a great question. Wow. Okay, that's a very, that question can literally solve, a lot of our issues. But okay, so I'll explain to you why I think it's impacted me a lot. Is because that's what we're contending with right now, right? The central bank, it's very nice to issue a stimulus package, to mitigate this COVID-19 pandemic that's really impacted our economy. Obviously, most of the money is going to the banks, who then onward lend or provide credits to, at a reasonable rate to entities who would essentially, you know, who need it for stimulus really, to procure what they need to procure for their working capital, to manage all their affairs, to keep their businesses going. Now, I would go back to what I was saying earlier about consolidation of investment. I would sit back and, yes, marketeers are very important in this economy, obviously within the informal economy. So there's less of an incentive to give the marketeers, even though as much as it can help them, have the resources to carry on their business and so on. Also because because it's in the informal economy, they're not paying taxes. So the economic return is a lot less. But I would look at it this way. I would use consolidation. The marketeers, what are they selling, right? Let's say they're selling tomatoes, they're selling capenta, they're selling all sorts of vegetables. You bring all the marketeers in a room saying, okay, you guys need to be part of the bigger commercial, the agro commercial supply chain by perhaps getting, first of all, having allocation of, let's say X amount of tomato, X amount of whatever produce that they buy. But then they're working in partnership with logistics entities, grain storage or food storage entities, processors, and the farmer, and creating an ecosystem where there's a seamless communication between all the participants within the supply chain. And the finance is I would say, lubricating that interconnectivity, where the person, the primary producer, is able to acquire their inputs maybe cheaper, maybe with more machinery, so that they have greater output to give to to the people who are trading the grain or going into the marketplaces. And then also perhaps adding value. So creating an entirely new industry of perhaps, or even upskilling the marketeer into being involved in at a larger scale. So not only is she a marketeer being able to sell into the market, but because she understands the economics of, let's say, tomatoes or whatever, that she's got greater capacity to perhaps even be part of the formal, call it retail supply chain, feeding into, let's say, having exclusivity on supplying into Pick and Pay or ShopRite. So that, I would look at it from that perspective. It would take a lot longer because, you actually have, and this is why, as I've been thinking, I've been kind of started a bit, because it's something that is kind of, you put me on the spot, so it requires some ideation. But that's how I'd approach it. That's the line of thinking I'd follow. It's formalizing them so that they are bigger scale.
So I'll get back to reading the questions from our viewers. I just wanted to so that we can get done with this topic. What do you think helps the economy? What do you think sustains the economy? Is it the buying power of the people or the availability of the service?
That's a good question. I think both. An economy requires, the thing about buying power is, because buying power is factored in the consumption element of GDP, right? It's, if a person has capacity to buy X amount of alcohol or food or luxury goods, it creates jobs, because that goes into a system, into a company. So buying power is very important. But I think there's a balance between, because this is a supply and demand question. Does supply trigger demand, or does demand trigger supply? I think it's always both. It meets halfway. That's why when you look at that very basic graph of supply, demand, there's the X where it meets. That's the sweet spot. So it's a balance of both, basically.
Okay, so we go to, this is Moses Sage Mtonga says, as a small and medium enterprise, it is at times difficult for one to pay tax other relevant payments, it is also difficult to pay workers the minimum wages or above. How do we survive in such a situation?
Yeah. So it starts with when you're getting started with your business. Even if you're already running a business, it's how well do you appreciate uh, your financial standing, right? Your financial position, which is obviously articulated through your balance sheet. But as you look at your management accounts, especially on your P&L or income statement, that clearly articulates your revenue, your top line, your cost of goods sold, your gross profits, your wage expenses, ZESCO, blah blah blah, rent, all that stuff. Then at the end of it, of course, maybe from borrowings with interest expenses. Then what's left at the end is essentially your profit, right? Your net profit after tax, because tax is paid after you've paid out all the how do I say yeah, your expenses and including interest expense, your amortization, depreciation, and so on. So you have to appreciate your business. That's why it's important to understand the business model very well. It's very important to be highly focused in your business model, because the more you understand your business model, then the easier it is for you to make a decision over how you pivot, how do you remodel your business. So, for example, if the minimum wage is too high, it means that there's something fundamentally wrong with the business model. It means that it requires you to look at the unit economics. And what I mean by that is the factors of production, depending on what sector you're in, is should you now be looking at expanding your market so you have a wider clientele base, or clientele base who can pay more, or depending on, again, those everything in a question of this nature is very subjective. It's very case by case. So my answer really is to really do a lot of reflection on your financial position, appreciating all those factors, because tax is a mandatory requirement. But you also have to remember that tax is essentially paid on, after your expenses. So it's on your profit essentially. So if you're paying tax, it means that you're profitable, which is a good thing. I assume, of course, there's other taxes, there's VAT, there's duty, and so on. So again, it depends on your sector. So I think explore it, and then the last point I make is establish what needs to be reduced in terms of expenditure, and also have a lot of discipline. The other thing I'll tell you about businesses is we don't have a lot. We treat businesses. In my case, even though I'm a business owner, right, a shareholder in the business, I'm not eating off the company like it's my piggyback. There's a process of a board who restricts the manner in which we access funds in the business. We get paid off dividends. I also have a salary in the business which is fixed, and I can only eat from the business from a dividend perspective if the company has actually accumulated those funds in the balance sheet, because there's a place in the balance sheet called retained earnings, where as you generate profits, it accumulates, and then when it gets to a certain level, you can say, okay, let's pay ourselves X percent. Obviously, it's not just a decision like that. It's a board decision that has to be properly ratified and the like. So it takes that level of discipline and governance to address this question. Yeah.
So we've clocked our 60 minutes, but obviously I'll ask you for 10 minutes so we can cover those time. So good. So this is
Friday. So good.
Good. So Muinsa is asking, and is imitating the Western system the only way for us, taking into account that we have a different culture?
Oh, excellent question. My goodness. No, we shouldn't imitate the Western system. We are a unique. Sorry, can you hear me? You see my.
Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you. We can hear you.
So I'm just making sure my audio is right. So we should not imitate, accent. Accent. You see, and that's part of the problem, right? A lot of what we have is prescribed to us. When you look at the way China is run, China's governance system, the way they run their economy, it's really connected to their cultural attributes. Our friends in Scandinavia, run, democracies that are highly socialistic, but a lot of have a good element of capitalism. There's a good balance between that. So there's ways in which different societies figure it out that's suitable to their culture. And we as Africans can really look deeply at our Ubuntu, right? Us making sure that you allow for free market to prevail with its safeguards, but also enable a social safety net so that, those among us who don't have access to certain resources are not left behind, that they have equal opportunity to these things. That we're still thinking in the same mindset of when we're in the village that nobody's going to go hungry because the maize field has enough maize for everybody. It's about organizing how people get allocated. We can think that way, not only as entrepreneurs, but yeah, as people from all walks of life. So I'm with you on the issue of, I mean, or at least my point is we don't have to imitate systems, but there's a reason why we do imitate Western systems, is because a lot of them work and they work very well. But at the same time, it's a foreign system. So is it adaptable? I don't know. That's a question. But there's a way in which we can do it that works for us. Rwanda has done a very good job at adapting or incorporating the most successful elements of Western cultures and systems, but applying a lot of their cultural ways of dealing with problems. I'll give you one example. So Rwanda has got what they call gachacha, right? Gachacha is a way, it's a justice system of sorting out problems in the community. So it doesn't take, like, our legal system, guys wear wigs, the same wigs they wear in the UK, and it's completely, it's okay. They love it. The lawyers love doing it. But the point I'm trying to make is, that was just a little jab at lawyers who might be out there listening. But Gachacha really was saying, in our community, we know how to resolve our problems. Like, they were the chiefs who would bring people together and say, okay, you stole that guy's chicken. Okay, you're going to get X lashes. Or, there's ways in which they sort things out, and it just works. Same way in which they are sorting out COVID. It's just, they've done an amazing job utilizing their own way of doing things without even looking elsewhere for guidance. So that's just like one of many examples that exists. And I see Mwami's got a question, so I'll give it back to you for that.
Yeah, so Mwami is asking, no, actually, I don't know if it's a she or he, saying, Jito mentioned creating an ecosystem of businesses. Do you think corporate venture capital could be part of the solution for entrepreneurs and startups in Zambia?
Absolutely, because venture capital, what it does, unlike a bank that's going to lend you money and just expect you to pay back without really caring how of course they care how your business does, because if your business does well, it means you're more likely to pay back if your cash flows are fine. But a venture capitalist is taking risk with you. They'll invest in you, they become shareholders in your company, and they want your company to grow. They want your company to have good governance and good structures, and really have systems that enable it to get to a strong level where optimal value is created, because that's how a venture capitalist makes money. So a venture capitalist is very, very key, cardinal to any economic ecosystem. In terms of startups, there are very few people who fund startups because of the fact that the risk factors are so high. Startups, the failure rate is over 80%, and when you're a venture capitalist, you're managing people's money. So if investors are giving me money to manage, and I'm going to invest in startups, and there's an 80% failure rate, it means that there's an 80% chance that I'm going to lose a significant amount of money, and I'm out of business. So we reduce our exposure to startups. We'd rather work with already established businesses because there's less of a risk, because the business model is proven. But there's also an opportunity for ecosystem. So I'll give you an example of the likes of Bongo Hive, right? They've got an incubator, they get startups, they prove the concept, they help you prove the concept so that the venture capitalists can get on board. So I think it's a combination of creating incubators, business incubators, so that startups can be involved in that. That's why I'm very close to the Bongo Hive guys, keep an eye on what they're working on. So hopefully one day we could back a company or two, from their ecosystem.
Okay, so I think we should be concluding. My last question, and then after responding to that, I will let you do your conclusion. So the capitalism, has to a greater extent contributed to the death of unionism, trade unionism in Africa and in most countries, because trade unions have always been the voices of the workers in many countries. So they, do you call them antagonists? I don't know that language. So they've always championed, they've always fought for better conditions of work and service and all that, and that comes at an expense for the business guy. Do you think trade unions, and so this is I want you to look at this from equality and inequality and human dignity, especially for those that get involved in labor. Do you
Yeah.
think in your in your picture of economic equality, do you think there is space for trade unions and for capitalism? Do you think
Yes.
they exist on one stick?
Mm. So the way I think of trade unions is the way I think of why you need. So you need so take government, right? Government has the executive, it's got the judiciary, it's got the legislature, right? And they're independent branches. I feel like everything has to watch each other. You know, for society to function well, we need checks and balances. You see, the way a public official has checks and balances, there's regulations, there's statutes that, and other institutions that really make sure that there's a prudent management of resources and all the guiding features. The private sector, as such is important because private sector should be the largest employer. It is the ultimate generator of value in an economy. And in order to ensure that people like myself and many other investors or entrepreneurs are behaving themselves, that it's not just about the profit, the welfare of the workers is very important. Of course, you also have those who abuse their powers as trade unions. I've personally seen trade unions who really just don't appreciate, let's say, the business model, and essentially, and all due respect to anybody who could be listening, who could be part of a trade union, but maybe asking for too much, where the business can't even afford to provide that. Like, no, you need to make sure that you're providing 6 meals a day for the employee, double, quadruple the salary. Da, da, da. He's like, man, but we want to do that, but we're not generating the kind of revenue that can allow for that to happen. So there has to be a balance. So I think both certainly need to be regulated, and I think legal frameworks should allow for this collective bargaining, platform, and where there's also a, whether it be through arbitration or any other sort of legal mechanism where there's an independent third party that could, basically have this hearing from the trade union and the employer who's the entrepreneur or investor, so that voice is heard. Because I think nobody should go unrepresented. Nobody should be voiceless. The same way investors, and this will sound weird because many people think of investors as being these powerful, evil people with so much power that they don't need representation. Investors also need a voice, right? So I've been in situations where I know I'm doing the right thing, or I'm part of a group that's doing the right thing. But because you're seen as, being you see, investors look as you're the privileged ones, right? You've got the resources, so therefore, even the perception from the public, even the PR sort of element is always going to be negative on the investor because they're just perceived to be the ones with the capacity. But in the course of doing your business and you're doing the right thing, and of course there's all these other elements putting pressure on you, and there's no one to stand for you, to speak for you on your agenda, your objective. You're trying to create a factory in the middle of nowhere. The hardest thing to do, raising capital, you're employing people, empowering people. You're answerable to investors and shareholders and so on. And, pressure starts coming in. Oh no, you guys are evil, and then you don't have an opportunity to explain that, well, there was nothing. There was these are 1,500 jobs that never existed. That's one. And I'm not trying to say that just because job is created that means that you should call the shots. But there's an element. All I'm saying is there should be an element of balance where everybody's represented. So to really wrap up the point, yes, there should be trade unions. There's a place for them in a capitalist environment, but the captains of industry should also be represented in a similar fashion. And institutions of governance should allow for that. Of course, there's the Zambian Federation of Employers and so on, who do a good job, I'd say. So that's my answer really to the question.
Okay, so I was gonna let you say your closing remarks, but then something came in mind as you're trying to explain.
Yeah.
Is there?
I owe you more time because of my crappy internet. We can go on for as long as you need. Yeah.
There's a concept called corporate democracy.
Okay. Yeah.
Is that something that you would recommend as an intervention to challenge inequality? So this concept of corporate democracy is where you allow, first of all, the workers themselves to participate in the decision
Mhm.
making. So they are
Yes.
involved at every stage. Do you think the intervention of such a concept would in any
Mm.
way from your sector, do you think
Mm.
an introduction of corporate democracy would in any way contribute to the fighting of inequality, and do you think that would undermine the concept of capitalism as you understand it?
Not at all. I think for me, it's safeguards. I'm a huge believer in safeguards. The thing about the reason why laws exist is because you and I, we will be running just rampant on the streets doing all sorts of nonsense.
Mm,
We, as human beings, we have to exist within a framework where there's controls, and for
mm,
that reason, whether it be a corporate or whatever. So capitalism needs controls. It needs regulation from government. It needs laws that govern its modus operandi, and then also within the corporate enterprise, not only should there be unions, as I mentioned before, but a level of democracy. And I think the point to substitute democracy, I'll call it transparency. So if the worker knows what the company makes, so for example, publicly listed companies, I happen to be privileged to be on boards, like two boards of public companies, which there's a lot of transparency, right? So everybody knows how much profit X company made because the books are published. You know how much what the remuneration is for the directors and so on and so forth. So to me, that's a start. But additionally, I feel that companies definitely need to have a scheme where, of course, there's pension schemes, right? There's private pension schemes that companies have, but they should also make it more interesting in the sense that the pension scheme becomes more of a how to say an an element of equity. So let's say the company carves out 10% and says this 10% belongs to the workers. When you become an employee of this company, you automatically become a shareholder in the company, or at
mm,
least, or maybe at a certain level. Or you can opt in. You can convert the funds sitting in the pension scheme into shares in the company. Now, what does
mm,
having shares in the company translate to? It translates into power, into voting rights. You can make
mm,
decisions over who directors should be. You can make decisions over all sorts of strategic decisions annually at the AGM. You get scrutinized. I get scrutinized as a director by shareholders. They'll call in and say, why, there's this problem in the business. We don't like XYZ. You've got this supplier into your business. Why do you only have, X number of foreigners sitting on, the management committee? Why, like also, and we have to answer these questions. So that is part of democratizing, um, you know, business. I'll tell you something, Philanthro, just a quick point. This is the most amazing time to be alive on this planet right now. This would not have been possible at any other time, right? You're sitting where you are. I'm here at home, and we're having a conversation. I don't know how many people are tuned in listening to this. This is
mm,
extraordinary. We could even have people from all over the world. Obviously, technology, innovations. There's social media, which has also democratized society. People can become a lot of things because of social media. There's political activism. There's musical stars. There's people like Justin Bieber became stars because of social media. He's recording himself playing, singing, and playing a guitar. It gets picked up by Usher or whatever. You know, and all sorts of businesses and opportunities are coming through because of social media. Companies are being exposed because of social media. So we're talking about corporate democracy. We're talking about transparency. If a company is abusing workers, or a company is, is involved in corrupt practices, there's going to be a whistleblower. Goes to Twitter, it's the company is done. I mean, the CEOs in some countries have gotten fired because of the democratization of the media space, and we as individuals have become journalists and you name it, whistleblowers, and because of our access to this innovation, and we've gotten to a point where generations are being born today who they found the world like this. You and I weren't. We were born without this stuff wasn't around, right? Social media is only like has only developed in the last 15 years. But prior to that, there was none of it. So the power that an individual has is so strong in scrutinizing their leaders, whether it be political, in scrutinizing companies that provide the services that they consume. So really to wrap up the point to address your question is that the democratization of the corporate space is already happening because it's a cultural shift, it's a paradigm shift across all societies as a culture, as a as part of our human existence.
Okay, so thank you very much, Jito, for creating time. You can say your last word, and obviously, I like to ask my guests to obviously speak to the people straight and tell them what they need to do to fight inequality.
So I'll tell you this. One thing that I've learned in my life is that it is so important to have empathy. Empathy is really the ability to feel or to walk in the shoes of another, to feel the pain of another or whatever the circumstances another is feeling. And for as long as there's inequality, it's not good for you and I, even if we're in a privileged position. I can tell you right now that if I'm well off, if I can afford to have my lights on and food in the fridge and afford to just live a decent life, for as long as somebody within our own space, within our country is starving or living a life where they don't have access to these things, it's going to affect me one way or another. We live in a symbiotic ecosystem on this planet. And if so, there's always a few examples of one person's hunger affects an affluent person because that person might resort, let's say, to crime or to some sort of social deviance that destabilizes the society. So for us to live in a society that functions in a proper way, we have to be participants in alleviating the suffering of others. So this is why inequality is a problem. It's something we should be conscious of, and it's something we should care about. Of course, not all of us can save the day, so to speak, but that we can do whatever we can within our capacity, whether it be through skills. So I'm doing something called Drip University, right? It's a mentorship program. It's a virtual platform where people can exchange ideas. I take all the things that I've learned by virtue of the privilege of having access to some type of education, having access to a certain cadre of mentors who've enriched my mind with so much information that I can't help but share, because it's that information that has enabled me to be where I am today in my profession. So the privilege of knowledge is something I want to share. And that is part of what alleviates issues of inequality. Because inequality, aside from resources, aside from lack of access to basic needs and goods, everything you see in the Maslow's pyramid of needs, a lot of it is actually based on knowledge. And the more knowledgeable you are, the more you can utilize it to get yourself in a situation where you could be of more value to your society and be more impactful. So to me, that's my take. And I think we all have something within us, something special, something that we could leverage to be a good citizen, a good human being. And we have to remember that everything we do does come back to us, both good and bad. So let's focus on doing good, because I know for a fact that there's nothing really under the sun that really stays in the dark. So we have to be aware of that and really do more good than wrong. And I think the last point really is um, we have a challenge to leave this world better than we found it. If we found it messed up, then let's address the issues that need to be addressed. I mean, and it's not offense to anyone. It's really the fact that we have to care because it's human and it's African. That's why I love the word Ubuntu. I am because your condition affects me. My condition can only be right if yours is right too. So that's my last point today. And thank you so much, Pilato, for this opportunity to speak to everybody out there.
Thank you very much, Jito. So thank you very much for everybody that tuned in. And just a reminder that this episode was sponsored by Open Pali Zambia, and with support from OSISA. And we'll be back here next week on Monday. I'll be speaking to somebody interesting, and obviously I only announced the name on Sunday. Thank you very much for tuning in, and this is called Heal Conversations. If you've not listened to the album, again, I'm going to say you can visit my website, www.iampilato.com, or you can search on your App Store or Play Store for PIMU, PIMU, and you'll have access to the music. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jito, for coming through.
Pilato, one last thing. We need to give the plug. Come on now. My favorite song on Pilato's album is called Economics Yamukaboba. It is a dope song.
And you
I
were
pumped that song.
in the video.
Yeah. Yeah, Pilato gave me the privilege of featuring in the video as a professor, you know. But you should look out for the video. It's awesome.
It's coming out tomorrow, did I say?
No, you didn't. I guess now they know.
I'm going to share it tomorrow. Thank you, Jito.
All right.